welcome to this explainer. Today, we are stepping right into the deep, dark shadows of a seriously grim Gothic fable. Have you ever heard of the uncanny Jester? Well, we are going to explore this profoundly dark story that literally weaves Nietzschean philosophy, the really heavy stuff, and the deep study of words, philology, into a massive narrative of ultimate unmasking. We're looking at a text that essentially forces us to stare at the very foundation of human self-deception. It is fascinating, absolutely, but yeah, it's a bit unsettling. So let's just jump right in and prepare to strip away those illusions, shall we?
Is this a final meal before we walk the absolute honesty of the total descent? Okay, what a line, right? Our story actually kicks off not in some bright, cheerful hall, but deep beneath these whispering ancient trees. Picture the emerald scales of the verdant dragon catching the flickering light as the characters gather around this rough wooden table. But here's the thing, this isn't for eating in the traditional sense. It's a brilliant nod to Nietzsche's concept of the descent, or the Untergang. This gathering, it's all about a shared reckoning of souls. It's about violently stripping away masks. The seraphim gargoyle, spreading its 6 wings of recreation, even notes that this very table is the meeting place for a spirit that absolutely insists on asking the hardest questions.
So what actually happens when the masks of society are finally stripped away? Let's dive into this philosophical autopsy. We're beginning our descent into the profound emptiness of human self-deception. When these characters force a real confrontation with the sacred in this kind of liminal space, the everyday familiar acts of society suddenly become strangely terrifying. Think about it. Every performance we put on is really just a wall built against the massive void of universal indifference. So what's actually left when the theater of our daily lives completely burns down?
Well, to walk the absolute honesty, we've got to look at this crimson coin the Jester holds. Imagine this coin as the final ember that prevents the soul from fully extinguishing in a world completely constructed of lies. And when we say absolute, we mean exactly that, free from imperfection, complete. It leaves literally zero room for partial truths or those comfortable fictions we tell ourselves. It demands a total, unyielding reckoning.
Okay, let's look at the timeline of the Jester's descent. Hour 1 is the churchyard, Hour 2 is the gilded hall, and Hour 3 is the stone cell. Moving through this narrative, you can see how it builds a literal and philosophical descent through the layers of societal artifice. 3 distinct hours, 3 completely distinct spaces. Each one represents a much deeper layer of societal masks just being ripped right off. We're moving from public grief straight into institutional hypocrisy and finally down to the isolated reality of the physical body.
Let's think back to the churchyard in Hour 1. This is where the Jester becomes the truth-telling monster to unmask the performative public grief of the widow. And wow, her tears, as it turns out, are a complete lie. They're this performative layer, a theatrical mask built right over a truth far too terrifying for society to name directly. The Jester realizes he has to speak from inside the wound itself, because the voice of a comfortable stranger can never, ever truly name the hidden spectrum of our real suffering.
In that exact same gray afternoon, the story introduces the heir. And to the heir, the Jester acts as the unsaid room. He's demanding that we abandon this cold arithmetic of inheritance. You know how society absolutely loves to calculate loss and gain, basically treating human connections like literal ledger entries? Well, the Jester's demand is to scrap this empty math and replace it by spending something genuinely real, raw, unfiltered human truth.
The body knows cold and hunger better than any theological arrangement. Now, what's really interesting here is how these souls are basically starving at a table of sorrow that offers absolutely no genuine food for the spirit. This really highlights a deeply Nietzschean concept, the sheer wisdom of the body over abstract floating constructs of theology. The body's immediate, raw reality of cold and hunger just cuts right through any theoretical or performative arrangement we try to drape over it. Moving into Hour 2, the narrative throws us into the gilded hall. Here we see 47 years of hypocrisy laid bare. Sitting there as a satirist among lords who, totally mistaking certainty for actual integrity, the seraphim gargoyle commands the marble stone angel to expose them. And boom, the angel's judgment, known as the blight of revelation, erupts as this blinding, cold white light. But here's the kicker. It draws judgment not from some mystical divine realm above, but right out of the hidden corners of the Lord's own shady negotiations, making every single face completely, terrifyingly readable.
And this perfectly illustrates the angel's main point, leaning heavily into the philological roots of the word itself. Hypocrisy literally comes from the Greek word for playing a theatrical part or wearing a mask. The deepest rot in that gilded hall isn't some malicious mustache-twirling plotting. No, it's a sincerity that has completely and utterly forgotten how to examine itself. It's the absolute danger of wearing a mask for so long that you genuinely start to believe it is your true face.
So in that blinding light of active nihilism, which is basically the destruction of false values to make way for real ones, the Lords have this massive realization. Their grand theology was merely a mask for their very earthly appetites. They are left entirely alone with their lit rooms, totally exposed. And the Jester's laughter echoing in that hall, that is the sound of a door closing forever on the muscle memory of their social machines. The act is officially over.
Finally, for hour 3, we plunge into a tiny 6x4 stone cell. Here, the high priest gives the Jester their true name, an instrument of truth. In this intensely confined space, by actually listening instead of just exposing, they make a profound discovery. The body is not just some temporary vessel for the spirit to endure. It's the very form the spirit takes. See, the spirit is the asking that insists on meaning, but the body? The body simply lives in the world that actually is.
Which brings us to this incredible dialogue in the candlelight. Every body made cold by a favorable tariff is a meeting place locked shut. This is such a fierce critique. It's saying that economic and social machinations, like a so-called favorable tariff, that result in actual human suffering, are physically locking away the sacred meeting places within us. In fact, to know what cold feels like is the whole reason the divine chose the human form in the first place. It's a huge, powerful warning about how cold bureaucracy literally chills the human spirit.
This is my body which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. This shared reckoning in that dark stone cell suddenly brings the characters to a very different kind of table, directly echoing that ancient text. Suddenly, this dark fable perfectly reflects the Last Supper, the fruit of the vine divided among disciples right before the kingdom arrives. It finally completes a narrative chord that has been suspended for centuries throughout the entire story.
The seraphim gargoyle hisses that to divide the bread is to acknowledge the ultimate meeting place of the human and the holy, this unconditional presence. But why does this actually matter for us? Well, the story is telling us that the commandment to unconditional love acts kind of like a prism. It takes the harsh, blinding white light of absolute honesty and bends it into a spectrum we can actually survive and see clearly. It leaves a peace that is an unwavering horizon of light, even when we are scattered in the middle of tribulation.
As the Jester's bells ring out for a thing finally given its full true name, the detour wraps up. We see the clear steps to waking the shadow side world. Step 1, the dragon becomes the ground of natural honesty. Step 2, the gargoyle affirms the vigil after the mirror of judgment drops. And step 3, together, they carry that burning light directly into the shadow side interiors where direct illumination usually cannot find a home. The instrument of truth is, at long last, ready to be exactly what it is.
What you do with the lit room is the only question that remains. Beneath the great star, shining with unconditional presence on every single soul, the uncanny journey leaves us with this one absolute truth. We've stripped away the masks, we have completely dismantled the hypocrisy, the room is now fully, undeniably lit. So the question I leave you with today is simply this. Now that you see the absolute truth of the world and of yourself, will you open the curtain?